Welcome, everybody, to this 17th of June, 2025, How to Talk About Gaps in Your Resume. I'm Heather Luna. Some of you know me already. I'll be moderating. And this is the launch, like the public launch of the Liberatory Livelihood Association, which is made up of Kay, Kim, Chris, and me. And we are all about supporting people with their livelihoods from a place of being very grounded in our values. And you may know us from other like coaching events or from reading us on LinkedIn, etc. And I hope that you know that we are very much grounded in values. And that is what we hope will attract people to our events, that they know that this is going to have a particular feel about it because of how we want the world to be and what we are doing, on our part to make that world happen. And so we invite you all to be with us in this. And this is our first event. And we have an email list, which we will give you the subscribe button to at the end in case you want to be notified of more. So it's really tough out there these days. There's a lot going on. There's a lot taking our attention away from either wanting to be able to think about the horrible things happening in the world, or we're being distracted by the horrible things happening in the world and we're finding it tough to put attention on our livelihood. And then on top of all that, we probably have some kind of anxiety about looking for jobs. And we have some kind of anxiety about interviews. And that is why we thought, hey, let's look at gaps in resumes. And that is a doorway into bigger issues. All of you registered for this event and identified many other issues that you have with interviews or with livelihood. We are noting all of those because we want to be able to serve everyone with those concerns. So with this event, though, we are going to start with the gaps. And if we have enough time, we're going to start to address some of the other questions that you've raised about interviews. And for those of you who have said that the whole interview process gives you anxiety, not just this particular question, we want to say that being prepared for questions is one way to deal with that anxiety. And that's why you're here. So that's a great first step. But also there are websites like Glassdoor, for example, who will give you a list of interview questions that you might expect. And so maybe through this process, through meeting one another, some of you have seen each other in other events, you can role play asking each other questions that are based on, typical interview questions that come up. So we will focus on the ones about the gaps in your resume, and then we'll get to some other ones, perhaps, if we have time. And then hope to address some other concerns in the future. So Chris, I just want to say, is going to be watching the chat. So if you have any technical issues, feel free to write to him privately or in the chat, and he can support you. And yeah, let's just get to the next bit about what to expect today. So I'm going to have our panel, our distinguished panel is going to introduce themselves so that you know who you're listening to. Then, as I say, we're going to talk about the gaps. Now, I don't know when the next things will happen, but wherever we are in the agenda, around 40 minutes past the hour, in half an hour, we'll take a 10-minute break. Then we plan to look at other questions that were put into the registration forms. And then, um, if we still have time, then we'll take open questions about anything that's come up for you. And then we will have our closing. So, with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that you can see our panelists. And I will ask Kay to begin. Kay, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi there. My name is Kay Coughlin. I am really excited to see all of you here today and to be here with my wonderful partners in this. My business is called Facilitator on Fire. I am a business coach and I specialize in social justice. That means that I do have an equity pay scale, an equity rate scale for what I do, and I'm very serious about that. And I tell people about it often. So if you think you might need a business coach, but you're worried about what the cost might be, I encourage you to reach out to me anyway. We can probably work something out. And I'm mostly excited to be here today because I think, given the way things are changing, we can't talk enough about how to be real, honest humans centered in values together. So it's exciting to be here with you. Thank you, Heather.
Welcome, welcome. Kim, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. My name is Dr. Kimberly Terry, and I probably spent my last 20 years in some form of healthcare. But for the last 4 years, I've been mainly focused on consulting with organizations to help them have more culturally appropriate practices. Also, as Kay talked about, equity as well, and helping people to create and maintain a culture of inclusivity. I am super excited as well to be here with my esteemed colleagues, and I'm here to bring a little razzle dazzle. So glad to be here, glad to see you.
Love it. All right, Chris, over to you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Musay Sequeira. Thank you all for being here. I'm based in New York City in the USA. My background is aeronautical engineering and environmental policy, but over the last 15 years of my career, I've slowly moved from a very technical domain of that to what I do today, which is to help people in the world of anti-oppression and liberatory work express themselves through their work, find clients, and be able to market themselves better. And in the context of that, what I'm really interested in seeing today is in offering our message about being authentic while still being able to make a livelihood, whether it's at a full-time job or part-time or something similar. We strongly believe here at the LLA that it is possible to do both, and we look forward to talking about that today. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Chris. Um, Most of you know that I'm a coach as well. Just can look that up later. All right, so I'm going to share the screen again so that we can orient ourselves to where we are. Okay, so we are going to begin with the gaps. And I just have to share with you a very short video because it's really funny. On Saturday, I think it was, I had just done the slideshow, right? And then I was like, oh, I'm going to put some crap television show on, right? Or find some kind of movie to watch. And I found something about Argentina. And the very first scene was this. I apologize that it's not high quality because I just used my phone and just recorded the very first scene. So here is it. Okay.
Why?
Oh, whoops. Sorry. There.
I'm going to cut straight to the chase here. Your resume is great. Do you want to be senior consultant at Davro, running a team at McKinnon Financial? You've develop strategies for some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies on the planet, and then nothing for a year. Why?
Frank, I'd rather focus on the future and what I can do for you and your clients. Paradigm shifts, visionary thinking, disruptive innovation. That's where my strengths lie, not in the past.
Listen, Abril, I know who you are. You're sort of a legend. You're the business consultant who almost drove $1 billion corporation into bankruptcy. I need to know what went wrong.
Greg, I would be good at this job. I live, breathe, eat business strategies. It has been my entire adult life, and my track record of success far outweighs one little hiccup.
One little hiccup? Come on, Abril, give me the inside scoop. I can use it to scare my junior consultants into working weekends. You're like the ultimate cautionary tale.
Thank you for your time. Please let me know if opportunities arise in the future. Thank you.
All right, so whether or not we could ask the panel at some point if they think that was a good thing to do, to just talk about the future when someone tries to talk about your past, or just walk out of an interview. Those are particular strategies that you can use. But before we get to that kind of situation, let's start with this question, which I'm gonna ask Kay to answer for us, which is, how do I explain a job gap that was due to integrating a new disability into my life?
Okay, thanks, Heather. So one of the things that you're going to hear from me as we go through these gaps, for the ones that I'm going to be talking about, there were some themes and some kind of general wisdom that I was able to gather up as I was preparing for today. So you may hear me repeat myself with some of these themes. I think they're very important. And I'll just share some of the appropriate ones with you as we go through this. The first thing that comes up for me in terms of themes, when we're talking about if you have a disability and you feel you may or may not need to disclose it, there's two really important things here. The first one is, I want you to hear me say this, and yes, in this professional space, but this space, hopefully, where also you're having kind of a soft place where you can deal with some very, very difficult things. All emotions are okay to feel. And I want you to hear me say that very clearly here between us. Not all emotions are okay to act on or express, but they're all okay to feel. So with a lot of these gaps, and I think this is a given, particularly the way we asked you to share with us what your questions were that were causing you anxiety, there can be some high emotions here. That is fine, right? That is normal. We are human, and I just want to reassure you that that's super normal. Now, you might not want to express those emotions when you're in an interview, but I want you to know that it's okay. Let's have that expectation between us that feeling those emotions is always going to be all right. The second thing that occurs to me about this, and you will hear me talk a lot about boundaries if you get to know me at all, personal boundaries, what's okay and not okay with you. You may not want to share with someone what your disability is or what your circumstance is. You may know that given your situation, there will be a time to share about a disability, but it's not yet. Okay. The first question that I would ask, we have people here from all around the world. Employment laws and laws about interviewing can differ greatly around the world. So the first thing to do, if you do have a disability that you feel you will need to disclose at some point, especially if it has to do with a gap in your resume, is find out what's legal in your area, if there are legal protections. So that's going to differ for all of us even here in the United States, that can differ based on the state that you're in, which is weird, but completely true. So check on the legalities and decide about your boundaries. Do you want to disclose it? And if so, when? So if you get asked this question, I see this gap, and you know that it's because of a disability. I would actually like to offer you a true, right? One of my values is honesty. I don't like to lie. I don't like to prevaricate. So I'm going to offer you a true but generic statement that you can use, and you can use it in a lot of situations. And this is one where it would be appropriate. And it's this: there was a complicated family situation that only I could handle. Now, I want to break that down just a little bit for you so you know what I did there. When I was writing up these answers, how would I answer this if I was in this situation? There were some strategies that I was using. The first strategy I used here was keep it simple. You do not owe people longer answers than you need to give. Now, you can save that kind of involved answer for a question that you are actually interested in answering and where you might like to share some good, beefy, juicy information. This is not one of those, okay? So you can keep it short. The second thing that you heard me do there, and I already stated this, but I want to tell you that it is a strategy, and I was really deliberate about it with this: honesty. That is honest. It is completely honest to say there was a complicated family situation and only I could handle it. There's no way you spin that comes anywhere close to a lie. That's 100% the truth. Okay, that makes me feel good about that one. And I think that was it. I think that was all that I wanted to share, yes, around this question.
Great. Okay, so if you have follow-up questions to disability, you can put them in the chat at any time, and we will come to them to all questions if we have time. But I'm going to pivot us to the next question, which is burnout. Kay, stay with us because I'm throwing this to you again. How do I explain a job gap that was due to recovering from burnout?
Okay, let's go to strategies around this one. Actually, I'm going to give you another theme that came up here. One of the things that I have noticed when many folks I know have gone to job interviews after burnout, after a burnout situation, those jobs that you might be interviewing for after burnout may not be dream jobs. I actually, not only is it natural and seems to be normal for humans in our cadence, I think that might be really healthy to give yourself a situation to go to where you might actually be able to take a little bit of a mental break, get some more rest, feel a little less personally invested so that you can heal. So I want to let you know that's totally okay here. When it comes to burnout, this is one where I'd like you to ask yourself if that's something you ever need to disclose to someone. Okay. You know, I just mentioned that it's really okay to interview for a job that might not be your dream job. This is what Heather would call honest work, doing a job that's a good job that will pay your bills, where you can do a little bit of healing, and it's not your dream job. Especially when you're going into a job that you might say, hey, this is an honest job or this is honest work versus my dream job. They might be the same for you. They might not. There's a whole scale there. I want you to ask yourself, do I ever even want to disclose this? I don't even know how long I'm going to stay at this job. you may not want to disclose about burnout. So this is another one where I'm going to offer you that same answer. There was a complicated family situation, and I was the one who needed to handle it. Again, it's 100% honest. There's nothing about that that you would ever need to explain to anyone unless you want to. We can talk about, if you would want to contact me to find out what a follow-up would be if you do have to then explain that later. But I would stand behind that answer 1,000 times, and I would feel really good about it and like it's really, really honest. I also want to say here another theme that I hear coming up a lot. And I think this is particularly important when you're talking about maybe if you have a disability or if you're recovering from burnout. So potential employers are not there to provide emotional supports. Employers are not there to provide emotional supports. They might say they are. They might say to you, oh, you can say whatever you want to me in this interview. Take that at face value, take it for what it's worth. I never believe anyone when they say that because an interview is not the right place for that anyway. They may not actually have the authority to say that. And so when it comes to talking about something like burnout, do not expect that they will give you emotional support. Certainly in an interview setting, they may not do that if you end up working there. And so that's why it's wise to ask yourself, is this something I want to disclose here?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Okay, our next one is neurodiversity. So how do I talk about job gaps related to neurodiversity, especially as I may need to discuss that due to accessibility in the future? Kay, what would you say for this one?
Thanks, Heather. So this very much follows along the lines of the last two that we talked about, which are health and personal related questions. And so the first thing that I need to do here is talk about boundaries again. There are many wonderful people in my life who are neurodiverse in different ways. One thing that is not well understood among humans in most relationships is this idea about boundaries. If you are someone who has some kind of neurodivergence, and the subject of boundaries is not something that you have talked about or learned about before going into an interview, I highly recommend doing a little bit of learning about boundaries. Simply because it tends to be confusing anyway. Understanding as you go into an interview that you do have a right to choose what you do and don't disclose, that's very powerful. That alone can calm you and relax you. So I understand. There is a person who helped us prepare for this experience today, who reminded us many times that simply interviewing, period, can cause a lot of anxiety if you do have any kind of neurodivergence. And I want to acknowledge that here amongst us. Anxiety about interviews is widespread. That's another one of those emotions that's okay to feel. Just like with any health issue, start by asking the question, do I need to disclose this at this time? And then ask yourself, at what point would I need to disclose it? There's a wide range of needs that people have on this beautiful scale that we call neurodivergence. Some of those things you will never need to disclose. Some of those things you might need to disclose much later in the interview process, or only when it comes to something like what kind of laptop you use, right? Because that may be all you need is some kind of just slight technology enhancement. So definitely ask yourself if you even need to disclose it. And if the gap in your resume is because you have neurodivergence, which really is a health issue, you are allowed to be truthful and say, I was experiencing a health issue, and it would not have been appropriate for me to continue with that employer. And so I chose to take a break. If that feels really bold to you, if you are feeling anxiety about saying that in your body, if you can feel that coming up for you and it's causing you anxiety, definitely let us know, because we can talk about that more at the end of this, or even after this. I would be happy to talk further. One of the things that you can do to prepare for interviews is practice hard questions like that. So the fact that you would feel that anxiety in your body when I offer you the answer right now and you're hearing it for the first time, that's a pretty typical response. I would expect that from anyone. It is possible for you to learn to either delay that response or overcome that response somewhat when you practice. And so we are going to remind you a couple of times here to find a buddy who you can practice with when you have these hard questions that you need to talk about.
I also have something to add there.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kay. And I'm just going to piggyback off of some of the things that Kay said. And whether you disclose or don't disclose, or you've had this time out, I like to sort of wrap things up in a little bow. And it's really okay to say, I needed to take that time to prioritize myself and my needs. And throughout that time, I did learn how to take care of myself better. I became stronger, whatever it is you became during that time, or if it was a much needed rest. I took the time that I needed to take care of myself. At this point, I'm ready to move on. I'm strong, I'm prepared, and I know that since I did take that time, which was very important, I can move on in this job and do A, B, or C. Just list out some of the things so they know you did your research and you know what you're talking about, but just sort of wrap that up in a bow. I took the time I needed. I feel refreshed. I've since learned self-care skills that I can implement during times of being busy, during, stressful situations. I am fully aware of who I am and my body. Whatever, how much you feel like saying, dial it back, go forward. You have to really be cognizant of the audience you're working with, not to disclose too much. But the main thing behind telling people what you learned or you took the necessary rest is you don't want them to think you're going to come into this position and have a breakdown suddenly or something like that. So that's why it's like, okay, this is what happened. I prioritized this. I learned this, and I'm fully prepared to step into this next role with all of me authentically.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next one is moving slightly away from what we've been talking about so far. And let me just share the screen. So, what happened at your last job? Now, if the honest answer is that you were only there for 4 months because it was a bad fit, the company didn't understand its own needs, and that's why it didn't make sense for you to be there anymore, how might you answer that? Kay.
Okay, so there are a lot of ways to answer this. There's a lot of context that we need here. Mostly it has to do with the type of job and the interview situation. You can give a bold answer, You can give an answer that is short and simple. You can give an answer that is filled with some truth. You can give an answer that is filled with some wisdom if you want to. So you get this is again, this is about boundaries. You get to decide how authentic do you want to be? How authentic can you afford to be in this interview? How do you want to approach this? Interviews are a place, this is another theme. Interviews are a place where power dynamics show up a lot. Sometimes simply remembering that everybody in the interview space might have something to prove and everybody might be feeling some anxiety. Sometimes that in and of itself can de-escalate what it is, can de-escalate the energy in the room. So the first thing that I'd like to offer in answer to this question is so this is a way to actually de-escalate a question that causes you a lot of anxiety and to do it in real time. So if the question is, you were only at this job 4 months, can you tell me more about that? You actually can say, by way of de-escalating, and that's literally the technique here, this is de-escalating. You know, I'll be honest, given the economy today, I don't know anybody who doesn't have a gap of 4 months on their resume. It's pretty common among my peers. Okay, so that is one way that you can just de-escalate it. And this is what I would call normalizing, whatever it is that they're asking you about. Again, because this is the literal truth. Personally, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know anybody who doesn't have at least a 4-month gap in their resume. And I'm also going to tell you that I think the very best people who I know are the ones with gaps in their resume that are harder to explain. These people have had, and I'm one of them, we have had to take our lumps. We have had to deal with very difficult situations and come back having made hard decisions and dealt with a lot of grief from our families. We have come back resilient. I wish we did not have to do this. I wish resilience was not a buzzword that rolled off of everybody's tongue, because I don't think it's fair, but I do think it's human. So in this case, right, you can absolutely say, I just don't know anybody who doesn't have a gap. I don't want to throw that one away, right? I don't want to brush it off as if that's the only way that you can answer it. I know one of the reasons that, or maybe you were only at a job for 4 months and then you left. The job was for 4 months and then you left. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, is to give a little bit of honesty about the situation. Let me demonstrate this one to you. All right, I have a list here. Hang on, I'm looking through my list. All right, here's what it is. A little bit of honesty. So in that position, I had a manager who wasn't able to accurately measure our performance given the metrics that we were told were going to be used. I found that extremely difficult. I'm an honest person, and I do like to follow the rules. And so that was not the right position for me. And I needed to leave. So there's a lot of honesty in that. Now, that is something that may feel pretty bold to you, what I just said. It's not actually all that bold. If you live with it and just try it out, roll it around your own tongue a couple of times, you're actually going to find that it's not very bold. Because it's very true, and everyone has been in a situation like that. It's very genuine, it's very loving. there was a situation where everyone was confused, and I found that I could not do good work in that situation. That's another way that you could answer that.
Yeah.
That's
and
what I've got.
I suppose also in that situation, you're saying, um, the honest truth is that the position wasn't what you thought it was going to be because the company didn't understand its needs. And so by hiring me, that it didn't make sense for me to be in that job once we both understood the actual needs of the organization, something like that. Okay. On that note, we're going to take our 10-minute break, and we only have a couple more gap questions left, and then we will move on to some of the other questions that either if they're about gaps that came up in the chat or things that we've seen that aren't about gaps that you put in your registration form. So I'm going to put up a timer so that you can see that we have 10 minutes. All right. So we are moving on to I've got a question for you, Chris. And the question is, how do I explain why I haven't been working the past 10 months when it is due to not having found a job? Take it away.
Thank you, Heather, for the question. And thank you to those of you who may have either asked this question to us directly or did not ask, but are wondering the same thing. And I'd also like to reference that which is in the chat because there are elements of this here that we could explore in terms of two topics. And I'm not going to pretend that either of these topics is exactly the right fit for you, but I do want to offer these two topics or categories perhaps as things that you could think about and see maybe how they map into your situation. So one situation is indeed you had this gap of a certain amount of time, whether it was months or longer, because you were in the active process of looking for a job. And here is where I think it may be useful for you to prepare with a little bit of sector specific research. Because without getting into too many details, many of us here on the call know that there are certain sectors that have been very much affected, perhaps even dismantled over the past several months. And what that has caused is a very large influx of people who were in the sector and now all at the same time are looking for jobs. And here is where I might very gently raise a little bit of the humanity of the interviewer themselves. And Kay was talking a little bit about this in different ways. This idea that the person we may be sitting across the room from may also have anxiety of their own right. They may also be well aware of dynamics in their organization, in their own sectors, even, but they may not be able to say that out loud. They will get you when you respond, even if it's not, shall we say, so direct. So, for instance, perhaps you are in a sector where it is known that the sector has been dismantled or it has collapsed or there have been mass layoffs in one way or another. And I believe in a circumstance like that, it is very much appropriate to talk about how it took time to find the right fit between you and an organization. For me, that is authentic, it is accurate, and it doesn't say anything more than that which needs to be said. we know, we meaning us job seekers as well as interviewers, we know that in a situation, a market situation where there are many job seekers and fewer people hiring, that the interview process being stretched to be longer and more difficult and more complicated is one way that organizations filter out people. So the person you're sitting across from, whether in person or virtually, is well aware that as you talk about the time it takes to find the right fit, you are referencing, without saying it directly, that there is a reality in which interview processes can be stretched out and made more challenging, more painful, more tiring because of this particular market situation. So that's one category that I like to think about, which is, yes, indeed, I was spending this time looking for a job. I want to be able to talk about that in a way that reflects reality, is authentic, and yet does not say more than that which is necessary to be said. The other category I want to talk about, which references a little bit more of what was shared in the chat, is that perhaps you may have taken time away to do something to improve yourself or explore a different part of yourself or a different part of the sector. Maybe you brought some of that to completion and were not able to complete all of it. So now it looks like a giant hole on your resume. Here is a place where I would say, and again, there is a certain aspect perhaps of understanding the sector that you're in and some of the sector's culture around training and development and education. But I believe there are opportunities to talk about things that you learned, things that you studied, and conclusions that you came to about the work that you want to do, about the skills that you now have, about the people that you now want to work with, that you can talk about, even if, for instance, you did not complete a certain degree or you did not get a certain type of certification. So this leans into the idea, I might say perhaps the idea of acknowledging an unfortunate reality that many institutions today are expecting to hire a person that's already ready to so-called hit the ground running. They don't want to train you, they don't want to do this, or they don't want to do that. They expect you to be able to start with no training required. And in a situation where you've spent a long time away, because you are trying to improve yourself and build up your skill set and learn more about a certain industry or a certain sector or a certain domain, I believe it's completely appropriate and authentic to talk about how you invested in yourself during that time away, even if it may not have led to a credential, because we are leaning into what is behind that type of program that leads to a certain credential. It's about explaining what's actually happening, what has actually happened through the process of seeking that credential. Just because you may not have that degree or that certification doesn't mean you learned nothing.
Could you say something like, I took advantage of the current market reality to do professional development that I haven't had time to do?
I believe that's very accurate. It may depend again on your sector and a little bit of the sector culture, but I can certainly speak without getting too much into detail about my own life. I can certainly speak to COVID in 2020 and that period of time, which is still ongoing, being an opportunity where many people decided to change their focus, change their sector, go back to school. The financial crash of 2008, there were similar conversations going on as well, at least here in the United States, where people decided to go back to school, change their vector, change their direction, and so on.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Chris. We are going to look at the Kim. Kim, I've got a question for you. How do I explain why it took me so long to finish my PhD?
Okay, I can speak to this from experience. So first of all, I'm going to pump you up. If you have a PhD, if you have any kind of doctoral training, understand that only 2% of the United States has that degree, right? So first of all, I'm not saying you walk in there as a super smarty pants, but what I am saying is own your space and your power, because that was super hard. And don't let anybody make you feel bad about how long it took you. So we're going to get that part cleared up first. So go in there armed, already knowing you're one of 2% of people that got it. Doesn't matter how long it took, you still got it. Anyway, if you haven't been through a PhD program, it is sometimes difficult to explain all of the stops and starts, the spaces and everything like that, right? So what you want to explain to your interviewer is that, PhD programs are extensive in themselves alone. There are a lot of waiting periods where things are taken and edited. You are sort of at the mercy of your committee or at the mercy of your professor. But what you want to do is highlight the skills that you learned during the wait. So you can say something like, I'm an excellent project manager. I had to be really flexible in this situation because it didn't all depend on my time. So I had to be patient. I had to be flexible. I had to try to account for delays, for setbacks, and I had to manage the time I had effectively. So what you're basically doing is pointing out that it is extensive and time intensive, but also not making excuses, but applying some of the things that you learned throughout the process. And if you're a feelings person and you want to add a little more flavor, you can say it was an extremely frustrating process. It was very long, but for the research that I wanted to do, for the quality of the deliverables that I wanted to put out, it took that amount of time. And I'm really proud of myself for getting it done. So what you want to do is take your power back from that question that seems very uh diminishing to what it is you did. Take that power back and talk about how accomplished you feel with the work you did. It took a long time, but it was worth every second, and you are so proud of yourself. When you leave someone with that, anything they say after that has to be positive because you've already turned that around into a positive experience. So that's what I have to say about that. Own your power and make it work for you.
Wonderful, love it. All right, the last gap question that came through the registration forms is about this, and I'm going to send it to Kay. How do I explain that my gap was due to taking care of a family member?
So actually, I'm going to tell you that Kim would be just as qualified to speak to this as I am, because Kim and I met through family caregiving forums a couple of years ago. I don't know when it was. And so I feel very supported in my work. I am still a family caregiver. I feel very supported in my life as a family caregiver because I know Kim. So what I'm saying to you is if you have further questions about this, I would actually turn to Kim first. All right. So one of the ways to look at this, I do not believe in being positive when when in a situation that I think where it would be false to be positive. Now, this is in stark contrast to what Kim just described. A PhD program, should you be positive about that at all times? Hell yes, because it's unusual and it's very difficult. But family caregiving is not like that. And it's okay. Here's another theme. It's okay to be human and to acknowledge the gravity and the difficulty of something that you had to do or a choice that you had to make. If indeed you did have to take a break because of family caregiving duties, this could be a parent, could be a sibling, it could be a child. My advice is to be very straightforward about that and to say, I had to take a break because I had a family, I had a family member that I needed to take care of, and I was the only one who could do it. And it was a very difficult decision. But I'm back now. There is that kind of honesty in a job situation. It connects you to the person with whom you're speaking on a very human level. We can feel that connection in our gut. I'm sure some of you felt that connection even when I just talked about being a family caregiver. And it's important to remember that if you are speaking with someone who cannot feel connected to you because of a choice that you had to make, like taking time off to be a family caregiver, which is a very difficult choice, that's a red flag about that organization. And I say that knowing that there are times when we have to take jobs with organizations where we have seen red flags. But if you are in the room with an interviewer who cannot connect to you on a human space, that's good data for you to remember when it comes to deciding would you want to take that job or not. Kim, is there anything else that you want to add about how to answer that question?
Sure, I can add a couple things. I think too, when people are interviewing you, yes, but you are also someone interviewing them. Even in situations where you're like, I need this job. I'm at the end because I've been there before. But also doing some of that back end research. Potentially, they do have benefits that relates to caregivers or something like that. You can speak from what you've seen in the past to what's happening now. For example, some months ago, however much time you took off, I had to take time off to care for someone. However, the advocacy and the fight and the benefits have increased for family caregivers. And I saw on your website that you have that you have something related to caregivers, and that really struck a chord with me because whereas I basically have my caregiver duties under control with help around me, I also would feel really welcome in an organization that puts an emphasis on caregivers in their benefits package, if that is the case. But what you want to speak to is that, yes, you had that time. Yes, that was a responsibility. It may still be a responsibility, but since that started, you've been able to gather resources and community to assist you with that. Because people who haven't been caregivers sometimes don't necessarily understand the sacrifices that exist and the resources that you have to hunt out every single place and the things you have to put in place to make sure the person you're caring for, gets optimal care. But just connect to that humanity and say, hey, I've made the connections, I've done the things, I've got this under control. And then if you can tie it back to some of their caregiving potential benefits, also tie that in because it also shows that you have a level of research as well. But caregiving is not something you can normally not ever disclose, right? So when you do disclose it, assure the interviewer that you do have things in place and you've learned a lot since you had to take off from whatever that last position was to be a caregiver.
Yeah, I mean, this speaks to how you do want to come with questions and information about that organization, right? You want to have done some research. This puts you this can help your anxiety because you are coming in with some knowledge about them. And when they say, do you have any questions for us? To say no, might show that you haven't really been engaged, you're not that interested in the job. And so by tying it into any of these questions, maybe specifically ones that give you anxiety, if you're prepared to then deflect, to answer very briefly and then deflect onto, actually, that I do have a question for you about that, or about something related to that, or about the skills that I gained during that time. I noticed that on your website you ... and and I would love to hear more about that. So just keeping in mind that, just like you say, Kim, that you're interviewing them as well. And this shows someone who's engaged, self, can take the initiative, that you're confident enough to ask them questions. It's a chance for you to demonstrate some of your skills and abilities. And at the same time, strategically handle some of these questions that can come up. So that's a great segue, although I'll just check, Chris, do we have any gap questions in the chat specifically about gaps?
Yeah, I would like to honor the chat that talks about taking gaps away to explore different parts of ourselves that perhaps may not appear to fit in the domain of the job that you're interviewing for at all. And I think further along the line, we may be talking a bit about this from a different perspective, but it's a point where I might want to lean back into just a little bit the idea of taking time away to improve ourselves and learn more about ourselves in ways that, number one, bring us as more well-rounded and more trained and more skilled people to organizations that we're interviewing for, and also gives us more clarity about what we really care about and what we want to focus on in our careers. I also believe that we do many things in our life that may on the surface appear to have nothing to do with work, whether we call it hobbies or artistic expressions or anything like that. There are all sorts of different words that people use, especially within the interview context. But I believe things that express the artistic side of ourselves give us capabilities and skills and knowledge about ourselves that do benefit us in the work environment, even if the work environment may be extremely technical or on the surface have nothing to do with creativity. Things like knowing how to write, knowing how to express ourselves with clarity, knowing how to work together with people, especially if we were doing an artistic pursuit that was a group pursuit, like playing music with a group, for instance, or doing some type of collaborative performance or drama or acting, being on the stage, and so on. Even if your artistic pursuit was perhaps purely visual and solitary, we learn things about layouts, we learn things about presentation, how to make things clear to people, how to understand an audience and what an audience needs, how different people absorb information so that they're able to take a message and understand it better. It depends, of course, on your pursuit, and it depends on the type of organization you're interviewing for. But I might invite you to take some time to yourself and explore those pursuits where you took time away to explore a totally different side of yourself. And just ask yourself, what are the ways in which this might sit within the organization I'm interviewing for, such that I present as a person that is more well-rounded with a variety of skills. And again, we are leaning always here into being authentic, our authentic selves, and explaining ourselves in a way that is really us expressing ourselves in a language that the interviewer can resonate with.
Yeah,
So
those are
that's
transferable
what comes to
skills, aren't
mind.
they? Like
Yeah.
you're figuring out that language. Like I managed a project. It was a creative project, and this is what I learned from it. Thank you very much. Okay, so we won't get to all of the topics that people raised in their registration forms, but let's see if we can get a few in. So we are moving to get my share going. We are moving to other questions, not specifically related to gaps. And Chris, I'm going to bring you back. Why did you contract with ... for so long? Or why did you work for this company for so long? Which is kind of a funny question because in the old days, people stayed with one company for a long time. But nowadays, it could actually be where that's seen as a lack of ambition or something, right? That you didn't move around and try new things. And yeah. So what would you say to that, Chris?
Thank you for asking that, Heather, and thank you to those of you who either asked this question directly or may be thinking about it. I'll talk just a little bit about my career for a bit, if only to provide some context for my answer. I started my career essentially as a federal government employee in the United States of America. And I remember when I was in the interview for that job, the interviewer looked at me and said, "We're hoping to find somebody to be in this office for at least the next 5 to 10 years. Is that something you think you might be able to do?" And my response to him, if I remember correctly, is I'm interested in this job because I believe that it fits very well with my skills. And so I'm interested to see how long we can work together and what the nature of that becomes, right? How does that change over time? So in the end, I did stay with that office approximately 5 years. Through that process, I learned a whole set of skills in a very nuanced way that I would not have gotten from any other organization. It was also in the type of organization that really required multiple years of exposure to even pick up some of the key nuances that were essential to the sector. Now, I want to acknowledge I'm speaking of my own personal situation in a government office that, in fact, performed a very unique function within the federal government. But I might also propose that perspective on your prior work to see if there may be unique elements that took a significant amount of time to absorb. And if you believe that speaks to your situation, I think it's worth it to consider how you may be able to present that in an interview in a way that shows that you are someone who listens and follows details over a long period of time and can show commitment to investing the capacity, whether it's time or energy or both, that's necessary to really understand an organization and a type of work with a high degree of nuance. That's not the same way as saying, yes, I worked 5 years for this organization in the past, and of course I'll work for you 5 years. No, that's not what you're saying. You're talking about being able to absorb information in a way that somebody who comes in and leaves for maybe just 1 or 2 years, in a way that somebody who is a short term, for whatever reason, is not necessarily able to do it the same way, especially if you're in a sector that may be highly technical, highly niche, perhaps highly regulated, where you have to have a certain understanding that, quite honestly, nobody teaches in school. There are many types of business that absolutely fit the situation of there are things you need to learn that you cannot find in school or even in a training program. So especially if you're working in sectors like that, or you're working perhaps in a specific geography that other people don't work in and don't understand, there's a way for you to differentiate yourself in talking about the skills and the knowledge that you're able to gain specifically through working for somebody for a very long period of time. Now, In contrast, perhaps your situation is you were at an organization for a number of years and you really didn't like being there, and you've been trying to search for something else all this time. I might actually still propose leaning in to some of the other things that I just mentioned. And again, in an authentic way and in a way that aligns with your values, ask yourself the question, for all the time I spent at this organization or on this contract or in this particular sector, just ask yourself, what are the ways in which the things that I've done built on the things that I did earlier in the job or earlier in the contract? Because I believe even if it's not a place you wish to be, or it's not the type of work you wish to do, I believe it's worth it to ask yourself the question, was I really, really doing this exact same thing the whole time? Maybe when you ask the question, you'll find, yeah, I was. But I think it's more likely that you were doing things that built upon and built upon and built upon, such that there was a progression of your own knowledge. There was a progression even of responsibility. There was a progression of the successes that you achieved during that process. And so I would just invite you to consider how you grew in terms of your own experience and skill sets over a period of time where somebody might have said, oh, you stayed too long and got too comfortable, to be able to challenge that story in a respectful way by saying, actually, these are the experiences that made me into the professional I am today at this moment, sitting in front of you.
Thank you, Chris. So because we're winding down now towards the end, I want to take some time to share with you the questions we didn't get to, just the questions, because we won't have time for the answers. But this is to give you a flavor of what we hope that the Liberatory Livelihood Association will be addressing in the future. And I'll also talk a bit about the things that we might offer. But let me just share my screen. So people ask questions about jumping around from job to job. Why did you do that? Or maybe why did you have a big career transition? Why are you applying for this job when you have no experience doing this job? What challenges have you faced in managing teams? Like those dreaded questions that are on the list of questions everybody asks if you're going to try to be a manager. As well as another hit is name a conflict and how you handled it. Name a failure and how you dealt with it. Can you share an example of ... So these are all like examples that if we'd had time, we would have gone to. What is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? And just as a very short tip on this is to ask for a context in which they would like you to answer that question. So that helps give you something to work with by saying, can you tell me more about the context in that strength or weakness? What if they ask a question that is not relevant to the role? What if they ask a personally invasive question? This is kind of like a taster, because I'm sure all of you are like, what's the answer? What would they have said? What would Chris have said? What would Kay have said? What would Kim have said? And we'll just have to run another one of these, I think, to continue on interview questions in general and not just around gaps. What is your current salary? Do you have to answer that? Are they allowed to answer that? What is your expected salary? These are tough questions to get. What are your future goals? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I don't know if this list of questions is making you, oh gosh, yes. Ah, exactly. And like Kim said, and I built upon earlier, we are interviewing them too. So not just preparing for the questions that you are going to get asked, but prepare for the questions that you are going to ask them. Why did you leave your previous job? If it was due to restructuring, how do you explain that? Okay, so I would like to do a very quick round of like 30 to 45 seconds each from our panelists to just say maybe a highlight of what you want people to leave with. And I will start with you, Kay.
Did you say Kay or Kim? I'm sorry.
You go ahead because you're talking.
Oh, okay, great. So what I want to leave people with is, you know, if you have true confidence, walking with confidence. If you don't have true confidence, walking with confidence. It just walk in with your head held high. The main thing is, and a lot of times people do ask questions and it sort of makes you feel broken down. Well, I did take a long time to do this, or I didn't finish this, or whatever. Take your power back, and I can't even say take your power back. Walk in owning your space and your power, because you don't actually have to take it from them. The thing is, people are going to ask you questions that may trigger you and may make you feel some type of way. But the point is, you made it to that interview, you're standing there, and you are so valuable and you have something to add. Know your transferable skills. Know when to say, I need a little more context and clarification on the question that you're asking. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. There is beauty in the placement of words and a smile. And if something seems to be negative, you bring it back around to a positive. Just like I said with the PhD thing, whatever they're saying about a gap or whatever, we are human. The world is in crisis. And it's like, okay, relax, okay? Let me do my thing. So try your best. Tell yourself before you walk in there, yes, this is scary. This may be hard. Some things may be triggering. Go ahead and set your mind for this might be the possibility, but also set your mind for the possibility that you are going to walk in there and crush it. So I just want to leave you with that. Some of that pre-game, get it going. It's okay. You're going to do great. You might bomb it. It could go either way, but you walk in there with confidence.
Thank you, Kim. Kay, 30 to 45 seconds.
Find a friend. Find a friend you can practice with. You might need two different friends. One you can practice these questions with, and another friend where you can talk about your real feelings about everything. Because remember, we are not going to pretend like we're not feeling these emotions that we actually feel. They may not be appropriate for the interview space, but make sure you have someone you can talk to about it. Write down your answers if you need to. Carry scripts with you. I always do that. It's brilliant. And stay in touch with us. Really, we are going to try to continue to be here to support you in whatever ways we can. Think of us as your community.
And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Chris.
Yeah, I would encourage you to take some time by yourself before any interview to ask the question, what during my gaps was I doing and experiencing that makes me into the person that I'm bringing into the room today? And it's not saying there's a right way and a wrong way to talk about yourself, or a right way or a wrong way to look at your own life, but rather I'm suggesting that you invite yourself to look at your experience in different ways, right? In ways that acknowledge your own reality as a whole person and allow you to present yourself as somebody who is strong and is capable and is skilled during that time when you're interviewing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. So we know a lot of you are struggling and couldn't afford to pay for this event. But if if you are able to make any kind of donation, we would really appreciate it. I think Chris will put that link into the chat. And so we do have this recording. We will send that out. We are going to offer you all a group coaching opportunity for people who've attended or registered. You can join the email list to find out what's coming up. There's a feedback form. We would love to hear what you thought of this so we can learn from it. And a lot of you, all of you did write questions about what other issues you have. And so you talked about ageism, you talked about questions, people asking you inappropriate questions about partners, not knowing how to balance being confident and being humble, unprofessionalism on the part of the interviewer, salary negotiation, racism, motivation, changing careers. There's so much out there. And this is part of what our purpose is, coming together as the Liberatory Livelihood Association. So we hope that you will stay in touch with us, and please do complete the feedback form and know that you're not alone. So many of us are going through this, and the point of our association is for people to associate with each other and not feel isolated in the face of everything that's going on. So thank you very much, and have a lovely night, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, everyone.